Welcome to another explainer. We usually think of night shift security jobs as, well, pretty quiet, right? Maybe even a little boring. Just a guy drinking coffee, watching over empty buildings while the rest of the world sleeps. But the accounts we're diving into today, they completely pull back the curtain on a much darker reality. We're going to look at what really happens when the lights go out. Let me ask you something. What do you think is the absolute hardest part of working the night shift? For most of us, the immediate answer is just staying awake. Fighting off sleep at 3 a.m. with a cup of stale coffee. But according to the night watchman in our source material, fatigue isn't actually the primary enemy. Not even close. It's something much, much more unsettling. The real nightmare, as one account puts it, starts exactly like this. It hits when the security cameras show someone standing right behind you in a room you know for an absolute fact is supposed to be empty. So today, we're going to explore 3 harrowing, escalating stories from our source material that prove exactly why sleeping buildings are rarely truly empty. All right, starting off with part 1, the warehouse ritual. Our first case study comes from a guard named Miguel. His story goes down in an old textile warehouse way out on the far outskirts of town. We're talking about a property so isolated, he reported that it literally felt like being at the absolute end of the world. So it's 3 a.m., a time when, as the source notes, everything naturally feels just a little more tense anyway. Miguel notices his monitor flickering. It was the feed for the basement, an area that was supposed to be completely sealed off. But as the screen cleared up, he saw a man in a dark hoodie standing perfectly still, just staring directly into the camera lens. Miguel's heart instantly started pounding, because the heavy iron doors to that area, they were locked from the outside. So he grabs his flashlight, grabs his radio, and begins the long descent down. This source actually describes his physical reaction here with a very specific Spanish term, escalofrío, basically a deep, cold shiver running right down the spine. When Miguel finally reached the basement, those heavy iron doors were indeed still locked tight. He opened them slowly, the old hinges just screaming in the absolute silence. But to his absolute shock, the room was completely empty. There was no one there. The man in the hoodie was just gone. Right as Miguel was about to radio in that, hey, maybe the camera feed was just a glitch, the whole environment shifted. He heard this wet, dragging sound coming from the deep shadows behind some old machinery. He aimed his flashlight over there, and illuminated on the wall were these unrecognized symbols, like weird rituals scrawled in fresh red paint. Right there in a place no living person should have been able to enter. Well, Miguel didn't stick around to find out who or what was making that dragging sound. He turned and ran, realizing real quick that supposedly abandoned spaces can harbor some very real, very dangerous activities. Moving on to part 2, the fake delivery. This second account shifts the threat from the sort of unexplained, creepy stuff to a very grounded physical danger. This is the story of Elena, who was working security at a gated community that was still under construction. Now, Elena initially thought this gig was easy money. She figured she'd just be driving around in a golf cart, checking that these vacant luxury houses were securely locked. Pretty chill, right? Well, that expectation totally shattered on a rainy Tuesday. She spotted a delivery truck parked outside one of the listings. And this was a truck that had absolutely no scheduled business being there in the middle of the night. As Elena rolled up in her golf cart, a man stepped out of the shadows. He was wearing a basic jacket, looked completely professional, and spoke super calmly, just claiming he was dropping off some construction materials. But Elena was hit with what the source calls a presentimiento. It's a bad feeling, that gut intuition that simply cannot be ignored. The truck didn't have a company logo anywhere, and everything about this guy's super calm demeanor just felt deeply wrong. So, following that gut check, Elena attempted to call her supervisor, and the exact moment she did, the driver's face completely changed. The friendly act dropped instantly. Suddenly, 2 other men emerged from the side of the vacant house. Elena realized, right then and there, she hadn't just stumbled onto some simple burglary. These guys were using the empty luxury homes as a temporary holding point for illegal activities, and she was now the only witness. With her hands literally shaking, she floored that golf cart, called the cops, and barely escaped the scene. Which brings us to part 3, the hospital interception. This final account is actually described in the source as the most turbia, or murky, of them all. This one involves a guard named David, stationed at a local hospital right near the maternity ward. David was on his rounds when he encountered an older woman wandering the halls. She looked entirely lost and super distressed. And the details here are just heartbreaking. She was clutching this crayon drawing of a woman holding two little girls by the hand, and she was crying uncontrollably in a language David didn't even recognize. Through her sheer panic, she somehow managed to communicate that someone had taken her babies, that she had been promised this better life, but it was all a devastating lie. Before David could even grab a nurse to help out, a man in a suit rushed over. He confidently claimed to be her doctor, and he looked right at David and delivered this exact line. "She is just confused. Everything is under control." But David immediately noticed this horrifying disconnect between the man's calm, reassuring words and his physical actions. I mean, the guy was gripping the woman's arm painfully tight, and the look in her eyes, it was just sheer, unmistakable terror. Thankfully, David didn't just accept the excuse and walk away. He actually followed them at a distance. He watched this supposed doctor lead the terrified woman not to a hospital room, but to a side exit where two other guys were waiting. They definitely weren't treating her. They were forcing her into an unmarked van. David immediately called for backup, and the police arrived just in the nick of time. It turned out that unmarked van was disguised as a medical transport service, but it was actually a front for a massive human trafficking ring. This leads us to our final section, trusting your instincts. These three stories, from a remote warehouse to a luxury construction site to a bustling hospital, they all escalate in drastically different ways, but they share a crucial core message derived from our source material. And here are the life-saving takeaways we all need to remember. First off, empty buildings aren't always empty. They are frequently exploited as havens for dangerous, unseen activities. Second, always pay close attention to out-of-place or unmarked vehicles. They are very often the first physical clue of foul play. And finally, and honestly most importantly, trust that bad feeling. Whether you call it an escalofrío or a presentimiento, that instinctive gut feeling of something being off is often our brain's absolute only warning system before a situation turns deadly. Miguel, Elena, and David, they survived, and they actually saved others simply because they absolutely refused to ignore it. It really forces you to reconsider the hidden world right outside your window, doesn't it? The next time you drive past a darkened warehouse, an unfinished neighborhood, or even a quiet hospital wing at 3 a.m., you gotta ask yourself, will you ever look at a sleeping city the same way again? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep your eyes open, trust your instincts, and I'll catch you next time.